our goal is to really enable existing plants to transition over to our way of creating milk, starting from 10% and ramping it up as time goes along. Currently, milk might be quite cheap, especially in the US, but as time goes by and we start having to pay the price of harming the environment, we will start to realize that we need to find alternative methods.
Welcome to the Business for Good podcast, a show where we spotlight companies making money by making the world a better place. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and if you share a passion for using commerce to solve many of the world's most pressing problems, then this is the show for you. Hello, friends, and welcome to the 29th episode of Business for Good. If you got in touch with me regarding the last episode with Lindsay Howie-Handler, the CEO of Phoenix International in Uganda, thanks. It was really cool to hear from you, especially those of you from Africa who were listening and who messaged me about it. Very cool that you're listening from Africa. I presume that was your first episode you ever listened to, and you're coming back for hopefully your second one right now. So if so, thanks. We're glad to have you as a listener. So on to this episode. Well, what do you get when you combine a Google leader, a dairy industry executive, and an engineer? Apparently, if you're in Singapore, you get a startup producing real cow's milk without the cow. Most of the time, though, certainly not all the time, on Business for Good, we feature somewhat later stage companies doing really cool things in the world in the hopes that their success will inspire you, the listener, to perhaps start using business to solve social problems too. Well, in this episode, we're featuring Fengru Lin, CEO of a promising very early stage, as in less than 1 year old at the time of recording, Singaporean startup seeking to build a more sustainable dairy industry. As you'll hear in the interview, rather than trying to turn plants into milky beverages like many alt dairy companies are, and rather than using yeast to make certain components of cow's milk, like Perfect Day, who we featured in episode 20, is doing, TurtleTree Labs is using bovine stem cells, expressing them as mammary glands and producing whole cow's milk that they claim is a 1-to-1 match from milk that was squeezed from an actual udder. The company got its start with 3 business-minded folks, including the former CFO of a very well-known dairy company in California called Clover Sonoma, thinking that they were on to something big. In fact, they're so convinced that their idea and execution will be a winner that they've already filed for several patents and have even put $500,000 of their own dollars into their startup. So sit back and be inspired by the story of a company I suspect you're going to be hearing a lot more about in the coming years, Singapore's TurtleTree Labs. Fengru, welcome to the Business for Good podcast.
Thank you, Paul. I'm very happy to be here.
Great to have you in Sacramento. You know, a lot of times these interviews are done over some type of internet communication, whereas here we are live in person in Sacramento. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Very excited to be here. We're around the Bay Area to meet with some investors, do some interviews. So very happy to have the opportunity to meet you in person.
Very cool. And when did you arrive from Singapore to California?
We arrived 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So we've had 2 weeks of meetings, and we're ready to head back very soon.
Okay, good. Well, I hope it's been a productive time. Needless to say, I presume this is the apex of your entire trip to California. Yeah.
It sure is.
Okay. So before we get to TurtleTree Labs, you have a very illustrious background in tech, not in food. And so I presume this is your first foray into food, but let's first get back to your tech roots. You were at Google, you were at Salesforce. Tell us what you were doing for these companies in Singapore.
Sure. So in Singapore, I was doing business development and sales for Salesforce and Google. And but on the side, I love to make cheese, and that's where the idea for this company came about.
Okay. And how long were you working at Google and Salesforce combined?
For about 5 years.
Okay.
I'm very familiar with the Asian market, going to market and tackling big businesses there that has global presence as well.
And you grew up in Singapore, right?
Born and bred.
Born and bred. Very nice. But Singapore is doing a lot to try to attract entrepreneurs to come and operate there. Isn't that right?
That's right, because we are an island country, so food security has always been a problem growing up. So the government has set up a 2030 mandate, where by the year 2030, we want to be able to produce 30% of our nutritional needs. So the government is behind us to make this happen.
Very cool. So when you say the government is behind you, what does that mean? What have they done for you all so far?
Sure. So there's several government agencies that are aligned in this goal. So for example, the A-STAR facility, it's where the Singapore main research facility, we're building our lab there, as well as Economic Development Board. They're going to different global corporates around the world and inviting them to Singapore to build R&D in Singapore. The Enterprise Singapore, they are doing 1-for-1 matching funds on some of the VCs here.
Nice.
As well as the Singapore Food Agency, which is the equivalent of the FDA here in the US, is also working with us to write the rules for this new type of food that we are creating.
Wow, that's really fascinating. So I know that the economic, what's the name of the economic board there?
EDB.
EDB, Economic Development Board. They are really trying to recruit entrepreneurs to go start their food tech companies in Singapore. And these sound like some pretty strong incentives to get them there.
That's right. That's correct.
Cool. Okay, so you like making cheese, you said. Then most people, if they like eating cheese, they're not thinking about actually making cheese, which is a pretty substantial process. But for people who aren't familiar, like how do you even make cheese? What's the process?
So cheese starts with milk.
Okay.
And milk is a very, very special liquid. Different pressing times, different pressures on the milk, different ways of treating the milk, adding different things like salt, rennet, would create different types of cheeses. It can be your oozy cheeses, your hard cheeses, and adding different things would also end up with creams, butter, yogurt. So the whole process of cheese making, dairy byproducts making is really in the process of treating the milk, and it all starts with good milk.
Interesting. So what got you into thinking, hey, I'd like to actually make cheese? I presume you're growing up and you're thinking, hey, this looks like a cool thing to do.
So I've always liked to eat cheese and I like to make things. So when it comes to treating the milk and handling the milk, it was a very fascinating process for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you become an adult, you're working at a high level in these big tech companies now in Singapore. And then you decide, hey, I like making cheese. Maybe I should go into the cheese making business as opposed to working at Google. Why would you think that?
So let me correct that a little bit.
Okay.
So the cheese making business was just an idea, but really it started with a hobby and it stopped there.
Yeah. Okay.
So coming from Google, we are very 10x thinking. We're always thinking about 10x impact with the same amount of effort that we put in. So in my hunt to find good milk, I found out that we cannot just rely on the limitations within Singapore or our geographical location. There has to be better ways to find the milk that we need.
Mm-hmm. And I presume that you, at this point, were somewhat familiar with the food tech scene. Like maybe you had heard of Perfect Day at this point, and you thought that you might be able to join that fray.
Yes. So I've heard of Perfect Day as well as my partner. So my co-founder, his name is Max Rai. He's very familiar with what is happening with Memphis Meats, what's happening with Shook Meats, and how they are using cell-based technologies to create food without the use of animals. So we did research around this area and found out that we could use similar methods to create dairy.
Very nice. And for listeners, if you did not listen to the Perfect Day or the Shook Meats episodes, they are past episodes on this podcast. You should definitely go listen to them. And in fact, Feng Ru, you are not the first Singaporean to come onto the show because Sandhya from Shook Meats has already been on. Although I guess she's not a Singaporean by birth, but
yeah, she might be. She's now lives in Singapore.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
We're good friends.
Very cool. She's wonderful and was a great guest on the show. So you meet Max, and what was his background?
His background is also in tech. He's a computer engineer, but he is very active in sustainability and new technologies with regards to food. So we put our heads together. We pull in a team of researchers, and we started doing research on how can we use stem cells to create the milk. And with the 10x methodology, we decided that we don't really want to just use stem cells to create the milk itself. We wanted to use the stem cells to create the engine that creates milk. Which is the Cell Secret sauce. That is, we are using stem cells to differentiate them into mammary glands that would then be induced to create milk.
Okay, so let's back up a few minutes here. You already know about Perfect Day. Now, what these guys are doing, for those of you who remember episode 20 on this podcast, Perfect Day is basically taking a yeast and they're engineering that yeast to make certain components of cow's milk, like casein or whey. And then they're using those as functional ingredients. And they just started selling their first ice cream ever, with has a small portion of it is made up of their whey protein that they grew. What you all were doing at TurtleTree Labs is something that is very different. You all are using stem cells to basically turn them into mammary glands to produce the actual milk itself, not just an individual component. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so you're a very new company. You were started less than a year ago. We're recording this in November of 2019. How far have you gotten so far?
So currently, we have been successful in differentiating the cells in the mammary glands and inducing these glands to start to create milk. So we have sent these samples to the lab, and we are expecting a match for 1-for-1 for the biomatch of actual cow milk.
So you're making an entirely whole milk process, right? I mean, this is whole milk, and you can then convert it into a skim milk or a 2%. Is that what you're expecting?
That's correct. So we are really building the platform of milk. And from the milk, we can build the byproducts like cheese, butter, yogurt. And as well, what's interesting is we can also edit some of these cells to create more fat content, to decrease cholesterol, or to decrease lactose. So these are some of the other avenues that we can go into as well.
That's really interesting. How are you funding this? I mean, you say you have a team of scientists. I presume these are molecular biologists and other very highly educated folks. I presume they're not working for free. So how are you funding this?
So currently, the founders have bootstrapped the project. We've put in $500K of our own money. But currently, we've reached a point where we want to raise seed funding so that we can accelerate the R&D process and scale our product.
Okay. What's the problem with milk today? Like, what is the problem that you're seeking to solve? Obviously, from a technological perspective, it's really cool to be able to produce milk without cows. But what do you see as the problem that you're trying to solve?
Sure. So I wouldn't call it a problem. It's really the challenge that we see, especially in the Asian industry. So I like to make cheese. So I went to Indonesia, I went to Thailand to look for good milk. But around milk industry in Asia, there are three main issues. First of all, animal husbandry is quite bad. Animal hygiene is bad, so which means the milk quality is affected. Secondly, there's lots of hormones like RBST that are pumped into these cows to increase milk yield, sometimes by 4 times. And thirdly, there's a lot of politics around the dairy industry. Things like contract farming, things like factory farming. These are quite rampant in Asia. So all of this means that raw milk is really difficult to find, and the milk byproduct industry is nascent in Asia. So a lot of the milk that we get are from New Zealand, Australia, sometimes in the US and in Europe, but it's an industry that can definitely be grown in Asia ourselves.
Fascinating. What is the reason to do what you are doing, though? If you look at the rise, let's say, of plant-based milk right now, you have a huge explosion in soy milk, almond milk, coconut milk, oat milk, and a variety of others. And they're really gaining mainstream popularity now. In fact, they're just, at least in the United States, while fluid cow's milk consumption continues to decline, fluid milk consumption of plant-based sources is just climbing. So why do you think that we need to replicate cow's milk as opposed to just creating a new and better plant-based milk?
Sure. So milk consumption may have decreased, but if you look at a macroeconomic level, dairy consumption has actually increased. And that's because of the byproducts that we are increasingly consuming. And these byproducts are supported by the raw milk industry, the cow milk industry, where you can only make these byproducts like cheese, butter, yogurt through clean milk that is raw and clean. And that's where TurtleTree milk comes in to fill that gap of a growing demand for clean milk.
So I wrote a piece about this, I think it was earlier in 2019, about how cheese consumption, at least in the United States, continues to increase. And because it takes so much more milk to make cheese than to make milk, obviously, while fluid milk consumption continues to decline, actual milk production continues to stay either the same or even elevate, just because we need so much more milk for cheese, and people are eating a lot more cheese, which I guess is an argument if you were interested in the plant-based space to make a plant-based cheese rather than another plant-based fluid milk, perhaps. But do you think that you'll have functional benefits over plant-based alternatives, no matter what type of form of dairy product you're making?
Absolutely. Because we're making the real milk, we are able to make all these byproducts without having to go through the recombinant method that a lot of our plant-based friends might have to go through. And the challenge with the recombinant method is that they are trying to reproduce every component of milk separately, which is very, very time-consuming and quite complicated because milk is such a complex product, which is why we gone with the method of creating the engine that creates milk, so we don't have to go down that path.
The engine being a mammary gland.
That's correct.
Yeah. So without betraying anything about your secrets, I know that you have filed already for several patents on the methods that you're utilizing. But what is it that the mammary glands need in order to actually start producing cow's milk?
Sure. So the mammary glands would need 90% water, because milk is 90% water. And the other components would be things like insulin, minerals and vitamins, the right pH, the right temperature, and they would start to secrete milk.
Interesting. Now, could you make other types of milk? I understand you're working with bovine cells, but could you work with other types of mammalian cells to make other types of mother's milk?
Sure. So our patent is really around different mammals. So if you think about lamb, sheep, goat, or camel, or even human's milk. So these are the different opportunities that we can explore down the line. But for impact, for really the goal of the company is really to disrupt this $700 billion industry. And the only way to do that is to partner with our friends from the dairy industry and work on bovine milk.
Well, let's talk about your friends from the dairy industry, because my understanding is that you are a 3 co-founder trio, and that one of you is not from the tech industry, but rather is from the dairy industry, right?
That's correct. So our COO, his name is M. Kalima. His family, his third generation, his family run Clover Sonoma, and he has been through many positions within the company like COO, CFO, and he's worked in the dairy industry for 20 years. So he's very valuable in helping us to scope our go-to-market and how we can work and partner together with existing dairy processors, with their existing customers, their existing supply chain to go to market and have widespread impact.
Interesting. And for those of you who maybe are not living on the West Coast of the United States, Clover Sonoma is a very well-known dairy company. You see their billboards all the time driving on the highway in California. So how did you guys meet? You know, it seems like a unlikely trio of people, let alone to meet in Singapore. So how did the 3 of you come to get to know each other? I presume a year ago you did not know of each other.
Yeah. So I've known Max for a while now. So we were old friends, but it's really like the stars aligned that we managed to meet M. So I was just leaving Google, and there was a lady called Diana Britt, who is M's wife. She just moved from Google in the US to Google in Singapore. So that was how we got connected. And the first time she met me, she was so excited. She's like, "You have to meet my husband. He's the most amazing guy. He's been 20 years in the dairy industry." And that's how we got connected.
Very nice. And so M, you've got Max and M. Sorry for conflating the two of them.
M&M.
M&M, very nice. Okay, so M is coming to Singapore. His wife is at Google. She's getting transferred over to Singapore. He comes along, leaves Clover Dairy, and now is looking for some new opportunity, and just by sheer coincidence ends up meeting you, and now you all are in business with a new food tech startup, huh?
That's correct.
And so you put your own money in, and you have very big aspirations. I mean, you just said you want to disrupt this multi-$100 billion industry. What is the ultimate goal that you guys at TurtleTree Labs have? Do you view yourself as being a complement to milk? Do you view yourselves as displacing certain types of milk products? Like, what is the actual goal of the company?
Sure. So I think I can go a little into our go-to-market strategy. We don't necessarily want to go around the world building plants of our own, but our goal is to really enable existing plants to transition over to our way of creating milk, starting from 10% and ramping it up as time goes along. Currently, milk might be quite cheap, especially in the US, but as time goes by and we start having to pay the price of harming the environment, we will start to realize that we need to find alternative methods. So our go-to-market strategy is really to work with these existing dairy processors and migrate over. So that's from the dairy side of how we view this, and from the consumer end as well. We want to be able to educate the consumers. So what we will have is a stamp of a TurtleTree logo in every carton that goes out. That stamp of approval would look a little bit like the organic stamp, where when you identify the stamp, it really associates with circular economy, about sustainability of how this milk is created, and that would enable consumers to make a conscious choice.
Interesting. So you are going for a play where you're seeking to have a branded product. It's not like Perfect Day, which is essentially making ingredients that will go into other people's products, but you envision consumer-facing products with your logo on them that people will seek out for the very attributes that you were just naming.
That's correct.
Yeah. Well, it's quite an interesting play. I mean, it's almost like an Intel Inside type play, right? That you want people to recognize this logo and to associate it with sustainability, which would be quite fascinating in that it would be essentially a biotech product that people might choose because of the way that it was produced, as opposed to in spite of how it is produced. So are you using genetic engineering? Will you have to, and if so, will you have to disclose that on label? Are there GMOs in the final product? How do you get along with this issue?
Sure. So from the start, when we differentiate the stem cells into mammary glands, we would have to GMO the product. However, after these cells are induced to make milk, we would either filter out or centrifuge out these cells, and the end product would be a non-GMO milk. So in some areas like Europe, it might have to be labeled as GMO, but in Singapore or in the US, it's fine. We are working very closely with the Singapore Food Agency to go through these different requirements. And at the end of the day, we want to be compliant and work closely with these agencies.
Yeah, it may not even be possible to sell it in Europe at all, but of course you still have the rest of the world that is, by and large, is not going to object, at least regulatory speaking wise, to having genetic engineering as part of the process. But it seems like similar, for example, to the way that Impossible Foods makes its heme, right? That they have a GM process, but the final product itself may not be a GM, might not contain genetically modified organisms in it.
That's correct.
So have you thought, Fengru, about the possibilities of what types of products you're making that aren't just mimicking the current products, yogurt, butter, cheese, but have you thought about when you divorce milk production from a live animal, are there other types of categories of food that maybe we aren't even familiar with today that you think you might be able to create?
So one of the interesting areas that we are looking into as well is, since we're doing mammary glands of mammals, we can also look at mammary glands of humans. So we know there's this company who is really trading mammals, milk from moms for premature babies. Mm-hmm. And these milk are very expensive and high quality, and it's high value. So what we want to do is be able to recreate that milk as well at some point to support these preemies.
So let me, first of all, as a preemie myself, sadly, I didn't get human milk, though. I don't think that I don't think in my mom's day that they knew how important it was. I've kind of joked that any health ailment I ever have, I blame on not being given human milk as a baby. But okay, so first of all, this is news to me that there's a market for human milk out there. How regulated is this? I mean, can I go buy human milk right now myself?
It's a very small market. Mm-hmm. So the human milk market it's quite special because a lot of moms who can lactate a lot, they just have a lot of milk stored, so they don't necessarily see it as a money making product. So they just store it and they would sell it almost at cost price just to help other people.
What is at cost price? I mean, what's the cost? How do they monetize this? Yeah.
Shipments,
Oh, okay.
cost of storing
Okay.
the
So
goods.
not the cost of like the metabolic cost to them to produce all this milk.
Wow, the mom eats more and then she charges
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, that's right, actually. Okay. Interesting. So, I mean, do you know, I mean, are you familiar enough with the market? Like, could somebody go out and buy that now?
I am not super familiar with the market, but I know there are a lot of companies which are working directly with the hospitals to make this happen.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it seems a little bit like the human insulin market. And so, for a long time, diabetics had to inject themselves with basically insulin that was produced through the ground up pancreases of cattle and pigs. It's like a huge market for cattle and pig pancreases. And then a company, Genentech, figured out how to basically synthesize real human insulin without having to have an actual human producing it. And now virtually all diabetics use that. They're not using animal insulin, they're using human insulin. And of course, there's fewer allergic reactions, and it's much purer. It's a much better for all around for diabetics. I wonder if there might be a market for this type of like a synthetic bio human milk out there. And if it is high value, maybe there's a higher profit margin that you can make than just replicating cow's milk.
Yeah, that's right. So right off the bat, our go-to-market is really not to match the prices of cow milk. We want to be able to create products that are high in value. So as a fun fact, out of the world's 5 largest baby formula companies, 4 have production in Singapore. So we definitely want to target high value products. So we're able to build the business for the next decade, until the world starts to see that we have built a brand that can be trusted, and the cost of greenhouse gases, of land use, of water use are starting to impact the amount people pay for milk. Then they will start to realize that TurtleTree can be the insurance policy that allows them to continue accessing these dairy products that they are used to.
Wow. Now, just going back to this idea of new types of foods. I mean, I think about it like if you go back to a time when there had been domestication of cows and people were drinking cow's milk, but nobody had invented cheese yet. Nobody ever conceived of cheese. Nobody ever thought about anything like Gouda or Swiss or cheddar or American. These are entirely novel culinary experiences, a whole new type of food that no one in history had ever consumed, and now is a regular part of people's diets. I wonder what types of products may be possible for a company like TurtleTree that no one has ever thought of. If you are not shackled to this biological organism of the cow that you have to inseminate and breed and then raise and produce all the crops for them, and you're limited inherently by the biology of that animal. But when you can divorce milk production from a living cow, I wonder if there are products that you all could create that no human has ever consumed before.
So I think the ability to create raw milk in places that has never happened before, for example, like the Middle East or Africa or in the middle of Asia, creates a lot of new opportunities for startups or other business people to do their magic with milk. Because creating cheeses is really all about the terroir of the land as well, like the milk and the cheese absorbing what's in the environment. So it's really up to the industry that we will open up once we allow people to access raw milks in this area.
Now, Fungri, you mentioned Africa and the Middle East and Asia. To me, these sound like places where, because there isn't a rich history of dairy consumption, there's very high rates of lactose intolerance. Can you make lactose-free milk through your process?
Yes, we can alter some of these cells to create milk that have less lactose or less cholesterol, or even increase the cream or the fat content for companies who want to create cream for cooking or cheeses.
Is that done in a post-processing way, or are you doing this like with biologically controlling these mammary cells as to what type of output they're giving?
we will biologically control these cells, and that's what TurtleTree would aim to do. But current dairy practices, as Em would tell you, they can introduce lactase into the lactose to digest the lactose.
In some ways, I mean, it is almost like you are engaging in a new type of domestication. I mean, you are figuring out how to domesticate mammary cells in the same way that thousands of years ago, there were humans who were domesticating cows and selecting the best strains. I presume that part of your process is going to be selecting the best types of mammary cells to get these different attributes that you're talking about.
That's correct. So we will choose the most ideal type of cow in their ideal lactation cycle. So different types of cows would have different cream content. And for the different cream content, some of the cows would be better for skim milk. Some of the cows would be better for cream. So we would select these mammary cells as the base product, as the baseline, where we base our mammary glands from. And as well, in the whole lactation cycle of a cow, when a cow first lactate, that's when the highest content of fat, nutrition, and antibodies are present in the female cow. So that is a snapshot of the mammary gland we want to capture as well.
Is there in the same way, you know, when a cow gives birth, she's producing colostrum at first, and then afterwards, like, can you guys produce colostrum?
That's right. That's what we're aiming for.
Wow.
Capturing the colostrum.
Okay. Well, for folks who aren't familiar with bovine husbandry, what's colostrum?
So colostrum is the first milk that comes out of a mother cow as she gives birth. And that's when the antibodies and nutrition content, the fat content is the highest, and to kickstart the baby in its life.
There might even be a market for the colostrum in the cattle industry as well. It should be, you know, calves who don't get colostrum have a lot of health problems, and so that might even be something that would be an animal welfare improvement in that sense. So you mentioned, Fungru, that you are looking to raise a seed round. How much are you guys looking to raise?
We're looking to raise 5 million.
Mm-hmm.
We have more than half committed already.
Okay.
And we want to close this as soon as possible before Christmas. And we really would use this money to kickstart our pilot plant here in Singapore, and invite that would allow us to invite people from the industry to look at how this revolutionary new technology can be used to scale up.
5 million now, will that be matched by the Singaporean government in one of those programs that you were mentioning?
Parts of it will be with VCs that are selected by the Singapore government.
Interesting. So if there are certain VCs that invest, then the government ends up matching those, but not all VCs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's correct.
So let's just say that you raise $5 million by December 25th of 2019. You get to work building this pilot plant. How soon before you think that you would have something that you could actually put on the market and start selling?
So by end of next year, we aim to have the pilot plant up and running. And we, as regards to when the product would be in the market, we would start looking for our customers in Q2 next year and partner with them on their ramp process on how to make TurtleTree milk as a supplement to their current milk supply.
Well, you all are the earliest stage company we've ever had as a guest on Business for Good. So I'm hoping that once you all have partnered with Danone or some other major dairy company, you're going to come back and then we can talk all about how you all made it big.
Absolutely.
So you've had a lot of success in the tech world, and now you are getting started in the entrepreneurial food tech world yourself. Have there been, Fungru, any resources, books, speeches, videos, anything that has been actually really useful for you that you would recommend to other entrepreneurs or wantrepreneurs that you think would be helpful for them?
Sure, of course. Listen to Paul's podcast.
If they're hearing you, they're already doing that.
And I listen to a lot of podcasts and watch a lot of Netflix as well.
Okay.
So these are resources that gives us inspiration on our next products and our next markets.
What are some podcasts or things on Netflix that you have found that were actually useful for you in deciding to create and launch this company? Is there anything that comes to your mind?
So you're putting me on the spot here, but one show that I really like is Netflix Genius, because it really encapsulates the IP industry and how we should view IP going to market. So some of the stories that they shared was around IP production, and it really inspired me to drive the company towards an IP-driven company. And we don't want to stop at the first IP. There is no point in chasing and protecting just one IP. We want to build a company that's forever innovating, always changing, always at the forefront of technology. And if people try to catch our old IP, that is something that is way back. We want to move forward as fast as possible.
Yeah, Ethan Brown, the CEO of Beyond Meat, has a good line where he says that he wants anybody who tries to reverse engineer their products to always be chasing their ghosts, that he wants to just, always be innovating so that whatever products they have on the market today will be worse than the products they're going to have tomorrow.
Exactly.
So if TurtleTree succeeds and you guys become a big company making a big impact, how do you think the world will be different?
The world would have a lot of happy cows. We wouldn't be completely replacing cows, but we would be greatly supplementing the milk that is out there. There will still be a small percentage of people who enjoy cows from milk, but for the rest of the world, where contract farming, where factory farming is so prevalent, we want to be able to allow dairy to be accessed by the masses.
Okay. Finally, Fungru, if you weren't doing TurtleTree and you were going to start another company to have some social impact in the world, what do you think you'd do?
I have an idea, but it's a secret.
Next, after your big exit here, you'll be doing
I'll
that.
Be back,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's say outside of the food tech world, are there any areas where you think that there ought to be some really good innovation to solve a social problem? Are there any things that you aren't tackling and that you don't plan to tackle in the future?
So I think what's interesting is the technology around farms.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of companies who are building bits and pieces of technology that can be installed into farms to optimize animal husbandry. But I think more can be done to pull all these different sources of data together to provide farmers tools for better decision making. Based on data.
Okay, very cool. Well, Fungru Lin, we really appreciate your work that you're doing to try to help disrupt the dairy industry and build a more sustainable food future. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found use in this episode. If so, don't keep it to yourself. Please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. And as always, we hope you will be in the business of doing good.